Moving forward, Revenstein further stated that the major direction of migration is from the agriculture areas to the center of industry and commerce. And if you look at the data from different parts of the world, and even in the context of Global South, we see that people tend to move from rural areas, essentially where you have opportunities from primary sectors, agriculture sectors, towards center of business, trade and commerce, which is largely located in mega cities at the national capital and state capitals. So if you look at the migration movements, they tend to take place from the rural centers towards the urban centers. Next is migration is mostly due to economic causes. So of course we know that there are multiple drivers which are responsible, but among the plethora of factors which may help to explain migration, economic causes tends to predominate, and largely people make a migratory decision. Either it is from rural to rural areas, from rural to urban areas, or even from urban to urban areas. The predominating factor in majority of cases happens to be economic incentives. So as I was referring, many times when you have a skilled labor force and there is, or even if you have unskilled labor force, the wage differentials both at the place of origin and at the place of destination plays a very critical role in deciding, when people try to make a decision whether they want to move or not to move. We may also understand that there are various factors which are actually working in order to make this decision of migration. So, for instance, factors associated with the area of origin, factors associated with the area of destination. There are also factors which are referred to as intervening obstacles, and finally the personal factors. So if you think about these factors of origin and the factors at the place of destination, these are combination of both positive factors, sometimes negative factors, and many times they are neutral factors. So for example, if there are couple who have children and they are seeking better educational opportunities for their children, they would like to move to places where they can give better education to their children. On the other hand, there is a couple without a children. They may not have an incentive to move to that place because moving to a place which is a larger city center, the cost of living would be high. So that will be a negative factor for them. So until they don't have a kid, probably the incentive of giving education for the child may not be as significant as compared to a couple who already have a kid and they want to give a better education to their children. And many times, if there are individuals who are not married, for them it doesn't matter. School education for them is not a great factor to make a decision whether they should be moving to a place, next place or not. So there are similarly different set of factors both at the place of origin and at the place of destination that makes or motivates people to move to a next place or not. And this may include, as I was referring before, that economic factors, social factors, cultural factors. Many times people have affinity to their native villages and they have spent their entire lifetime. It is very difficult for them to move out to a new place because they are not sure whether they will be able to assimilate in the new culture at the new destination. So even if he or she understand that there are better economic incentive at the place of destination possibly, but he or she is not sure if he or she will get better opportunity of assimilation at the place of destination, and hence they may not decide to move to go to the place of destination. Talking about intervening obstacles, so this is largely refers to the distance and the cost of movement between place of origin and the place of destination. So with improvement in the modern technologies of communication, movement and transportation, gradually the impact of intervening obstacle has been receding. Yet these intervening obstacles play a significant role with regard to people's decision of migration or not. So often we find, in developing nations context particularly, that distance is still a very significant factor when it comes to decision of migration, and largely in case of, if you look at female migration particularly, that is even more significant. And finally is the personal factors. There are many individuals who are very much not accustomed to making changes in their life. So when you say migration, it involves huge change in the social web of relationship, cultural milieu set, and that might actually make people understand that this is something not my cup of tea. Some people may not be very much accustomed to accept the change because of moving from native places to the new locations, and therefore on the other we also have some people who are pro change, who can adjust in new location, who can easily assimilate in new context, who can easily make new social relationships. So they have a greater propensity to move to a new locations. So based on these set of factors, both positive and negative at the places of origin and destination, also depending upon the intervening obstacles and personal factors, and of course the life cycle of individual also. The possibility of migration does not remain the same throughout the life cycle of individual. It is relatively large in adulthood, and as people become senior and elderly, possibility of migration further go down. And so therefore when you look at the migration, I think these four important factors play a very significant role in terms of understanding the migration. If you look at migration, there is something called stream and counter stream. So migration tends to take place largely within well-defined streams. So there is a common place of origin and there is a common place of destination. So if you look at, from India, a lot of people are moving from the eastern states to the western and the southern states. And then you have a very defined migration stream, place of origin and place of destination. Similarly, if you look at international migration also at the global level, largely we see that majority of people are moving towards Europe and North America, and partly in Australia and New Zealand. So these are places which are highly urbanized, industrially advanced societies where there are ample opportunities. So people who are qualified with greater skill set are welcomed according to their national policies. So therefore we observe that there is a well-defined stream of migration. A lot of people from India also move abroad to Middle East, both for skilled job, unskilled job, and many technocrat, medical professional, artists, also move to Europe and North America. So there is a well-defined stream of migration. So for every major migration stream, there is also a counter stream that develops. So as I was referring earlier, when people are moving from distant locations, remote locations, rural areas to the urban areas, we also have a counter stream. So when there is a vacuum created in these locations, people from nearby places come and occupy to fill these vacuums. Moving forward, we may also look at that migration is understood through a very basic fundamental idea of push and pull factors. So often these push and pull factors are related to both positive and negative forces which are working at the place of origin and at the place of destinations. And this may also include the personal factors of individual, including their age, sex, marital status, educational status, economic status. So all these factors, along with economic, environmental and demographic factors, actually influences people's decision of migration. If you look at the neoclassical theory of migration, it is seen that migration is primarily a function of geographical differences in the relatively scarcity of labor. So places where there is a scarcity of labor create opportunities for people to come in and fill the gap. Now if you look at today's global society, where a lot of industrial economies are actually experiencing the issues and challenges of population aging, there is a huge dearth of educated, skilled, young labor force. Whether it is Japan, whether it is Europe, a lot of these countries are actually looking for skill set, young people to come and contribute to the economic development story in these places. So therefore, people, those who are qualified and they are willing to move to these places, so they are helping these place of destination economy to grow. So therefore rural urban migration continues as long as expected urban income exceeds rural income. So there are also wage differentials which are very significant. So often people with a similar skill set may get different wage rates, and then if they come to know that there is a location where you may get higher wages, so they would like to go and seek these opportunities either within country or abroad. So migration causes labor to become less scarce at the destination and scarcer at the origin. So what happens is, when the skilled migrants are moving to new locations, probably in the Western societies, then the scarcity of labor force or the labor problem is reduced. However, it generates a new problem of scarcity at the place of origin. So gradually what happens, that the wage gaps comes to a level of equilibrium, where the wage rates at the place of origin also increases and the place of destination remains saturated, and so there will be an equilibrium in the economy. If you look at the spatio-temporal transition, it's very important to understand the migration process, because migration is actually also viewed as a constituent part of the development process. And so if you look at these processes which are associated with migration, they may include modernization, economic development, urbanization, and demographic transition. So migration, if we have to explain, we have to understand the implication of these important transition. If you look at this graph, is basically putting together demographic transition along with migration transition. So you may note here that in traditional societies with limited economic development, there is no incentive for people to move to long distance or different places. But as economic development takes place, there are greater opportunities of economic incentive at urban centers. People tend to move from rural to urban areas. And there is also a world system theory of migration, which clearly shows that predominantly most of this migration is originating from places in the global south, where opportunities of education and employment are relatively less. On the other hand, majority of the magnet, actually the places of destination, happens to be North America, Europe, and Australia and its oceanic countries. So this is largely because these are the major centers where we have economies at the advanced stage. There are greater innovations which are taking place, and there is a huge dearth of trained professionals, and thus most of this demand of skilled labor force is being fulfilled from global south. So therefore this tells us that we have to understand the temporal and spatial patterns of migration, and if we have to explain these, then we have to understand how the process of modernization, economic development, and demographic transition has unfolded within country and internationally as well. Recently, in order to explain the process of migration, people have been using the concept of capability approach proposed by Professor Amartya Sen. And they are arguing that migration theory should include the structural constraints and independent choices, or we may also call them agencies. So every region, every state, every nation has a specific economic and social structures which provide opportunities for people to experience economic and social mobility. Depending upon individuals' own skill set, individuals decide whether they will be better off staying at their place of origin, or their life will be even better if they move to a potential place of destination. So drawing upon the cost and benefit, they make an informed choice if they want to move to a potential place of destination to make a better life for themselves and their families. So therefore, if you look at the structure and agency in migration theory, it is important to conceptualize the migration at the micro level as a function of migration capabilities. Individual mobilize human, social, and material capital in order to migrate. So if you have to think about migration, it is just not the individual skill set or the economic resources that he may have. It may also include the social capital and material capital together, which make people a decision to move out. Many times the social and material capital helps to buffer the risk which might be attached at the place of destination. So these migration capabilities becomes an important source of information and source of comfort for people to decide if they want to move to the new place or not. Talking about migration aspirations for personal, social, economic and political opportunities, it varies from people depending upon their educational composition. It may also vary depending upon what sort of information they have, and also depends upon their social networks. So people coming from families or locations which have traditional linkages either in different part of the country or maybe internationally, so they may find more perfect information about opportunities at the place of origin, at the place of destination, and then they can decide whether it is really important or it is useful to make a move to a new place or not. So if people who have limited education or maybe have imperfect information or do not have a personal social networks, they find it difficult. So a lot of research in recent times has shown that social networks, education and information, if people have access to these resources, then their choices of making migration actually fructifies than other people. We have also seen that development and migration processes are closely related. So as the process of development is unfolding, a lot of people are actually migrating from states which are not doing well to states which are doing well. So if you look at the regional disparities within country or between country, is one of the important factors why people are moving or looking for better opportunity at new places. So societies typically go through these migration transitions, so from rural to urban areas, until you have greater opportunity or equal opportunity in different part of the country itself. So if you look at the pattern of initially increasing and subsequently decreasing migration, is actually in tune with the prevailing regional disparities in the level of development. And as societies are transforming, we see that the migration pattern is also changing in tune with the level of development of any societies. So initially you have in a society where you have large regional disparities, opportunity only exists in few areas, so you have a lot of out migration from rural to the urban centers, and gradually as opportunity becomes more equally distributed across the space, then this migration may gradually subside, and people might look for opportunity abroad. So this is a simple graph that helps us to understand over time what may happen. So as the process of development unfolds, we see that a lot of people initially in a huge volume tend to migrate abroad for basically better wage rates, and if the economy is not well to do, then there is not incentive for people from outside the country to come in. And as the process of development unfolds, if you see both the curves are increasing, but the pace of increase is higher among emigrants, and after some time we observe that emigration actually is coming down. And this may happen why? Because investment is coming up into the native country, a lot of technological, business, scientific development, infrastructure development, improvement of ease of doing business, better infrastructure facilities, greater equalities, for and greater protection for minorities. So all these kind of positive macro environment, conducive environment for development would mean that over the long run, the immigration, people going out, this tendency would come down with the process of development being witnessed in the native countries. On the other hand, you have a lot of people from abroad who would like to come and do business and contribute to the opportunities of economic growth elsewhere. So largely if you see, the Western economies, the business houses, industrialists, they are now gradually moving and shifting their bases of investment in Asia, in Africa, South Asia. So these are countries and these are places where there is enough opportunities of development and the potential is huge. And thus, as the development is taking place, a lot of people are coming actually from outside the country so immigration is happening where people from Europe, from America, from oceanic countries are coming to invest in these traditionally countries where the potential of development is still a lot, and therefore there are still some concerns with migration theories. We have made a lot of progress in terms of understanding and explaining these migration processes, but as you know that there is no perfect theory, there is no perfect law as such which can explain, given the complexity in every geographical location, its social and economic uniqueness. It is difficult actually to provide a theory that can explain every migratory movement, but yet these are new challenges that social scientists, including geographers and demographers, has to appreciate and propose new ways of explaining these complexity. So finally, if you look at some of the important concerns related to migration theories, I think one of the important point is to understand why do people migrate. This is a very important question, and if you go deeper into this, there are multiple reasons which are working at macro level, at individual level, at family level, and they have to be understood well. So either it is related to one's age, one's sex, one's educational set, one's family conditions, maybe because of the local social or political circumstances, maybe because of the prevailing environmental conditions. So all these factors together may propel somebody to decide whether they want to migrate or not. And finally, why they choose to go a particular place, what is the role of agency and structures. So all these decisions will help us to understand how people make rational decision to move or not. So with this, I would like to thank you.